Dialogic Disciple is an invitation
to explore discipleship
in dialogue with the world as disciples of the Word. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Dialogic Disciple podcast. My name is James Johnson and I am here with my co-host
Elizabeth Shaby.
Elizabeth, once again, we have an incredibly special guest with us in the studio today, studio/office, Reverend Douglas Herlong.
That's me.
Am I saying that correctly?
That is correct.
All right, Douglas. Do you go by Doug, Douglas, Dougie? What's your preference?
So I always tell people, like, I introduce myself as Douglas. My dad always went by Doug growing up. And so what's funny, though, is when I went off to college and seminary, it just was kind of natural for people to shorten it anyway.
Yeah.
So I always tell people I introduce myself as Douglas. I like to have that kind of, if my name is announced or whatever, that's what I prefer. But I roll with it, man.
You just whatever.
Yep.
That's
cool.
good.
All right.
I like Douglas. I'm not really a nickname kind of person. I don't like nicknames for myself.
She likes to be called
I
Liz.
like full names.
Yeah,
and I something about that. So like I'm on board. Yeah, everyone calls him Jay.
Yep.
Every once in a while, if I'm just really feeling lazy, most when I'm writing it, I'll say Jay. But James, like your name is James, your name is Douglas. I'm on board with this.
Yeah, I went by Jay most of my life. I'm named after my father. It sounds like you might be as well.
Yeah.
And I was born in 1980, and it was right during the big Dallas, like the show Dallas was on, and there was a guy named JR on the show, and my mom didn't want me named after my father because she didn't want me called JR. She didn't want me called Little Jimmy or Little Jim.
That would have been weird.
Or anything like that. So she agreed to name me after my father if I could go by Jay. And so I went by Jay my entire life until I got here to Northside, and Dr. Gil Watson was like, we don't use nicknames. We go
maybe this is it, right?
We use our full names.
Dr. Gill and we have something in common there.
I will be James. And so I've been James for about 10 years.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's good to have you here today, man.
Yeah, man.
And it's good to have you here at Northside.
Absolutely.
How has your experience with Northside been so far?
It's been great. One of the things, especially over the past few years, there's been so much, it's just the world's just got kind of crazy. And
what are you referring to?
I mean, nothing big, completely normal. I've definitely been just kind of all around given. I got commissioned as a provisional elder in 2020, started ministry around that time, finished seminary. My last year at Boston University was right as the pandemic was underway.
Oh, wow.
So that was like step one of what would be a whole whirlwind of changes after that. Northside's been great. It's very similar to a church I served at when I was in South Carolina.
Okay.
I moved to Georgia last July because I got married to my wife in May. She is working at Emory as the Christian chaplain in the religious life office.
That sounds like a cool job.
Oh my gosh.
It just seems like it would be amazing.
Yeah. There's parts of the job I'm jealous of because like before ministry, like I was really involved in campus ministry settings, FCA, campus outreach and stuff. And so a lot of what Maddie does is like, I'm like, man, that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I just love campus environments anyway. So, but anyway, moved to Georgia in July, was appointed to in kind of an interim position at a church in Carrollton. And so after was done there, they were a church that went independent. And so being appointed here at Northside has been great because closer to Maddie.
Yeah.
Very similar feel as far as what I was used to before. And it's been great getting to know this community and all the people here.
So for people who don't know, and maybe listening, all 4 or 5 people who listen to this podcast, I'm just kidding. You are provisionally appointed here, or what's the terminology for your position?
Oh,
here
let's lay down some
Northside?
UMC polity.
Yeah,
Let's go.
yeah.
Let's go. I know nothing about this.
So I am what's called, I guess, a displaced pastor, which means
that is so sad, Douglas.
I am in exile.
Used.
I am in exile.
Wow.
I'm here in Babylon.
Yeah.
By the rivers of the...
You are loved here. You are welcome here, Douglas. Oh my gosh.
I heard him singing songs about Jerusalem and Zion in his office.
That's right.
The waters of the Jordan.
Man, that's a good idea for like a devotional.
Yeah.
Pour my heart into it. Yeah. So in the United Methodist Church, if you're an elder, I was ordained an elder a couple years ago. You serve under appointment. The appointments last for a year at a time, right? Mm-hmm. If you're an elder, if you're ordained, you're guaranteed an appointment, but every year you're up for, there's a chance that you can be reappointed.
Right.
Going in pursuing that order, we've got elders and deacons. If you're going in as an elder, like you're giving an oath that you will offer yourself without reserve no matter what, right?
Right.
So the tricky situation for me and for a lot of pastors have been, if you've been a part of a church that's, for my case, it was a church that decided to disaffiliate and go independent, or if you are in a situation where you can no longer serve at a church, the onus is put on the conference to find you a place or some way for you to finish out your appointment year until something more permanent or whatever else is established. And so Northside, I mean, it's just been such a grace and mercy that they were able to take me on the staff as a way to kind of finish out my appointment year. So I'm serving, during the 6-month period of time. March or April is right around the time where cabinet convenes and appointments for next year are made.
Right.
So right now I'm just kind of serving in as a support role to finish out this year. And my prayer is hopefully I'll get to be here long term.
Absolutely.
So.
Great.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, there's a place for you at Northside Church.
So I've been told.
So you seem like a very chill kind of person. You've got a very even keel kind of vibe. I don't know you very well, but that's my impression of you. It sounds also like, especially in the first part of your career, these last few years have been marked by a lot of chaos and upheaval, right? Like being impacted by the pandemic. Have you adopted this sort of attitude because of all that, or are you just a naturally chill person?
That's a good question. I would say my personality is normally pretty low key.
Yeah.
I'm definitely a go with the flow kind of guy. This has definitely been a test of flexibility for sure. It's more of the challenges is like staying, kind of focused and non-anxious during so much uncertainty, so much change. Being able to just kind of give it over to God and embracing whatever, comes, whether expected or unexpected, new appointment, new location, whatever, and just being able to kind of see God's hand in the midst of all that. But naturally I'm pretty laid back. The test has been, I also like to kind of know what's ahead of me or like what's down the road. But I've grown in that respect of just being able to say, you know what, it's okay, and don't, try to stop getting 2 or 3 or 4 steps ahead of time. Just be in the moment.
Right.
So
There's a church member here that I was talking to not terribly long ago, and he said that something he's been working on is trying to start his day by saying, all right, God, whatever you have for me, I'm going to just lean into that. And so maybe I have some things that I think that I might do today, or just kind of a general guide of where I might, what direction I may start off in. But can I be so open and so unhindered that if God put something in front of me, I can just roll with it.
Yeah.
And that just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I just really admired that human being, because that is a lot to be able to do that. And that takes a lot of fortitude and a lot of intentionality. I tried to kind of incorporate some questions like that into our devotional this year, just trying to ask, like, how do we take that mindset? But that's kind of what it makes me think of that you're talking about, like I have thoughts, I have dreams for my day, my life. How do I truly wake up and say, okay, here's what I think I might do, but God, whatever you've got for me, I can do that instead, and I will try to truly be okay with it.
Absolutely. I mean, thinking biblically too, there's a lot of biblical wisdom in terms of having that posture of being open and being able to, focus in on what you see, the present day, what God has kind of put immediately before you. Obviously, Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, do not worry about what tomorrow will bring. Yeah, that's a great portion of the Sermon on the Mount. But also one of my favorite verses in Proverbs 17:27. The second half of that verse says, a man or one who has understanding has a cool spirit.
Ooh.
I love
like that.
And I even I went in to see if that was a just a translation thing.
Yeah.
It literally is a cool spirit,
cold, like cool.
Same thing of like a breeze or whatever.
Right.
Is something that comes from there.
It's not saying like you're the
I
fawns.
love that.
Yeah. So
That's awesome. That's great. Yeah.
What's that citation again?
Proverbs 17:27. I'm
All right.
pretty sure.
Okay,
Right.
cool.
Cool
Not that I'm going to test you. I
spirit.
want to go. That's
Yeah.
I want to hold on to that. That's cool.
I'm gonna go look up later. All right. Did I get that
yeah,
right?
that's fantastic.
So Douglas, you're from South Carolina. Is that
That's
correct? You grew up in South Carolina. Did you grow up in the Methodist Church? I mean, how was your what was your upbringing?
Yeah, I grew up in a small United Methodist Church, literally right across the street from my home growing up. I grew up in a very small town, like 2 stoplights, farm town, a lot of peaches. It was kind of peach country. I even worked in a packing shed when I was in high school because our high school football coach was one of the owners of one of the 2 big peach farms.
Okay.
And so I did that. My dad was a farmer. His main job is working as a sales manager for a builder supply industry. But on the weekends, he loved farming, and we raised beef cattle. So I grew up in the country on the farm,
Okay.
And this was something I always did when I was in seminary up in Boston or even at Clemson, is like trying to get people to guess how many people were in my graduating class.
Oh.
Okay.
All right.
Oh man, let's go 11.
I was going to say
I'm going
17.
small. I was going to go 17 too.
Oh.
You were closer.
Yeah,
Are you
really?
serious?
Yeah.
Wow.
12.
What?
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
I am imagining the sense of community was very strong. Is that
Big
true?
time.
Okay.
Big time.
Yeah.
Everybody knew everybody,
I mean, this is a Bible study at this point.
Yeah, I know.
Wow.
Got just enough to follow Jesus. Got 12 people.
Yeah.
That's right. There you go.
That's funny. So how does a kid from South Carolina end up in Boston?
So I went to Clemson. My whole family, we love
Clemson people.
Clemson University, the football team, everything. Sister went to Clemson. And
It's a lot of orange.
Lots of orange for sure.
Yeah. It's a strong color.
Oh yeah. My wife would absolutely disagree, but it's okay. We give her grace.
Is she a Georgia girl?
Big time Georgia girl. She didn't go to Georgia. She went to Sanford, but she loves Georgia football, and her whole family, same thing. So.
Have you heard that song that's out on the radio now? I can't remember what it's called. I think it's called Tennessee Orange, but it's about a Georgia girl who's wearing Tennessee Orange now because she's fallen in love with the Tennessee guy.
Oh, man.
And so she's talking about, and in her heart, she'll always be a dog, but, but she's, sorry. She's basically like calling her parents or something and apologizing for wearing the Tennessee Orange, but she's in love. Just reminds me, Clemson Orange instead of Tennessee, but
yeah. Well, I will say this: one of my best friends growing up, man, we were friends since middle school.
Mm-hmm.
He, when we were in school, was a diehard University of South Carolina fan.
Mm-hmm.
Diehard, absolutely. Now he ended up coming to Clemson for what he was going to study. He got into nursing, and swore up and down, going to stay faithful.
Stay faithful.
Yeah. But man, we just kind of chipped away at it, and it was right around 2015 when we went to the national championship, but we lost. And he and a bunch of friends up in Clemson were watching the game together, and I'm pretty sure he would say that was the moment because he, for the first time, felt that pain, that emotional investment in the team. And now he's a diehard Clemson fan.
That's funny.
Oh, wow.
So I've seen it happen.
You've seen it happen, yeah.
It's rare.
So you went to Clemson, but how'd you get up to Boston?
So I had a professor at Clemson. I changed majors a couple times,
right? I mean,
yeah, for sure. So a professor who was my advisor, I took a lot of classes with him. I went through the religious studies program at Clemson, which was kind of a smaller group, smaller department. So the professors could be very intentional with their students. And if you were going through the major, your junior year, you had to do a research project, a research colloquium, and then your senior year, you had to do a seminar with all the seniors.
Cool.
So this professor, not only was he my academic advisor, but he worked with me through some of those courses. He went to Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary up in Massachusetts, and he was kind of the first guy who got me into like nerding out about Bible, languages, texts, history of textual studies, all that stuff. And so it was kind of one of those cases where, you see your role models and you just kind of do what they do. Yeah. He also told me, we had a conversation one time when I was, it was probably when I was trying to figure out classes for the next semester. And we had a conversation about, were you going to go to seminary, what you're going to do next? And I was thinking seminary at the time. I was still discerning whether or not ministry was my calling. Okay. But he did encourage me. He was like, you need to go away. You need to get out of your comfort zone and experience something new. And I just kind of took that to heart. So followed his example, but also let me go. This is the few times I'll probably get a chance to do something different. Yeah. And so what I ended up doing was going to Gordon Conwell my first year, which was a wonderful experience. I got to do, like I said, I got to do languages. I got to do classes in exegesis, biblical studies. And then around that time, I reconnected to a pastor who was the senior pastor at the church I served at in Aiken. Knew my family growing up. Once again, that whole area, small town, everybody knows everybody. Was spent years and years and years in ministry in the United Methodist Church. Did a lot of stuff for the denomination, served as parliamentarian for the annual conference and a delegate at general conference for many years. He and I connected. At the time, I was still trying to figure out like what was my path. Was I called into ministry? When I was in college, like I wasn't so much focused on like being like in the local church, in the United Methodist Church. It was mainly campus ministry stuff. But he kind of convinced me to. He said, these are your roots. These are where where the gospel kind of first planted itself in your heart. And he saw the gift that I had for, what would be a call to ministry. And so after that, learned about the process. And the main thing I needed to do was to take the required courses needed for ordination. Right. But I didn't want to leave Boston. Gordon Conwell at the time didn't have like United Methodist history, polity, stuff like that. And so what ended up happening was I went from outskirts Massachusetts to right in the middle of the city of Boston and went to BU School of Theology.
And that's a Methodist school, or it's Methodist seminary anyway?
Yeah, it's one of the 13 quote unquote United Methodist seminaries. This history goes back a long time. Yeah. Started by Methodist and was kind of one of the early places where ministers were trained. So yeah.
All right. Excellent. Yeah. Excellent. Wow.
That's awesome. To have someone speak those things into your life, I'm sure you've had this experience, James, like just that, I've had that here with people, just someone looking at you, someone that's, older, a little bit more experienced, even if it's just by a couple years, or has walked the path and looking at you and saying, I see a thing in you, nurture that. That is just, that is so special.
Yes.
Very formative.
It gets to that whole, we've talked about this many times, but the whole mentorship and stuff like that in the faith, that's so important. Just having somebody recognize the gifts and graces in you and then point you in the direction. What's interesting about the way you told that story is sounds like you had one professor who was like, you need to get away, and then you had another professor who was like, you need to come home, but not home physically, but home, like this, where you're being pulled toward this place where you like you said, where the faith was planted in you. So you kind of had both and kind of thing going on there, like that tension.
It kind of follows that, in screenwriting and storytelling, people talk about the hero's journey, where you go off, you experience something, and then you bring something of value back to your community or place of origin, and it was kind of like that. I mean,
we were big fans of the hero's journey here on the Dialogic Disciple podcast. We did a devotional a few years ago. It's kind of all over the place, but one of the things,
one of our devotionals that we talk about how there's actually multiple devotionals like in it, because we just try to do too much.
It was like the second one we'd ever done, so it was several years ago now. But we did. I mapped on the disciples' journey onto the hero's journey, and it was pretty fun. Nice. I'm a big fan.
Did you throw in some like George Lucas quotes or something?
That was the love one, right?
We should all be should all be like Luke Skywalker.
That'd been pretty epic, actually.
So, Doug, we are right now in the heart of Lent, the season of Lent, heading toward Easter. How do you? I was going to ask you, like, what's your favorite part of the church calendar? How do you feel about Lent? Are you a fan of Easter? Or are you anti-Easter?
Man, if I said I'm not a fan of Easter, I might be in the wrong profession.
Yeah, right.
Oh man. So what do I think about Lent? What's my favorite part of the church calendar? Lent is definitely. I'll say this. I feel like Lent is something that I feel like, especially in our current, in kind of the broader American Protestant, world, there's so much of the church life that has a tendency to kind of have an impulse more towards the, like, bring everybody in, like, let's try to meet the needs of the people sort of thing. I'm glad that, the church continues to hold on to the tradition of, let's have a dedicated part of the year where what we're focused on is self-examination, is spiritual, inquiry, discipline. What is it that we can do to kind of, I mean, this doesn't sound really attractive, but like do the work of faith, so to speak. Or maybe do the work on ourselves, so to speak. Mm-hmm. We just don't have, I feel like in the broader culture at large, we don't have much of a tolerance for that. It's more of like, let's do whatever we can to make life more comfortable,
yes.
More accessible, more whatever. Not like, what can we do to, I keep discipleship, one of the great metaphors is metalworking, like tempering metal. What can we do to kind of like refine or to put quality into our character, our spiritual life? I'm glad that we do that. I think that's something that we don't necessarily do a great job of letting people sit in tension in the church.
Right, yeah.
And we certainly don't do it in culture. So no, it's a good thing. And I love it when people get curious, get interested, and like, I've heard many different people talk about, like, what's the best practice to do Lent? What should you do? What should you give up? And every tradition kind of has their different take on it, whether it's an actual like Wednesday, Friday fast, whether it's give up something for the season. But really it's more of like, what can you do to be, more closer to God and more in tune with where you're at in your spiritual walk by the end of it than when you began.
Yeah.
So I'm not so much focused on like, did you like give up the thing for the full 40 days, whatever. It's like, have you noticed a difference when Easter comes versus when you began?
Yeah, that's good.
I like that a lot.
Like that in my mind is like evidence of the Holy Spirit working in your heart to mold you and shape you, so to speak. So,
that's good.
No, I like that. I don't know if it's my favorite part of the church calendar. I love Christmas, so Advent's obviously a wonderful time.
Yeah.
I love, seeing, I think Advent too is a great time of year where, like, either consciously or subconsciously, the church really looks at the whole story of God and the whole story of salvation.
Yeah.
You have a lot of like Old Testament, allusions to the coming Messiah, and then kind of the crescendo on Christmas when he comes. So probably if I had to pick a favorite, that'd probably be my favorite.
Yeah.
So.
I'm taking. You have something to say?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I'm taking a class right now called Cultivating Spirituality Through Mental Health Practices. And we're talking about a lot of identity formation stuff, which reminds me of kind of what you're getting at with the whole Lent thing. And James, I know you've gone through a lot. You have your little identity paradigm diagram. So I think about that. But how do we dig into the story of who we are and how we have gotten to the place that we have gotten to in this life? One of the books I'm reading talks about how much of our what's going on in our brains is actually memory. It's related to how we were raised, what we've experienced, and whether we're not necessarily conscious of it more often than not. Yeah. But the way that we react to things around us, to people, a lot of it is based in our past experiences. And so what does it take to be aware of that stuff, to dig into our story, to dig into our identity, who we are, who we have become, and how do we like relate those things to how I am functioning now in relation to the people around me and my community and God.
Yeah.
I just think that's so fascinating to me. Those are like the building blocks.
Yeah.
I love that.
I think that the practicing the church calendar. I grew up in a non-Methodist tradition. I grew up in the Nazarene church, and it's kind of like a Baptist Methodist hybrid, you might say. But we didn't do any kind of liturgical stuff in church. Well, we didn't do anything that we called liturgy anyway. So there was I didn't know what Advent or Lent were until I got to college, and had some professors who were big into that kind of thing. But so one of the things that I've learned to love about it, though, and one of the things that I cherish deeply, I think, is starting with the first Sunday in Advent and really going through Pentecost, mapping the story of our faith onto our calendar, onto our daily, day in, day out kind of thinking. And I think you're right, like especially during the season of Lent, when a lot of the focus that we do for Lent in the devotional stuff that we've done is in one way or another trying to talk to people about what it means to die to yourself and what it means to truly be crucified with Christ, and spending that 40 days like surrendering and whatever it is that's going on in your life. And I like your idea there, where when you get to the end, you should feel like you've made some progress in that journey, right? So that when Easter comes, you can feel the resurrection, not just in Jesus Christ, but in yourself as well, right? I'm a big fan of the idea that we are living into the resurrection even now, that eternal life begins the moment we believe and not just after we die. And trying to get people to, and myself really, to grasp what it means to die to self, surrender yourself, become poor in self, as we were talking about this year. But that journey, I think, is so important. And the idea of mapping that onto time, that's been really beneficial for me in how I structure my own thinking and my own kind of devotional spiritual practices.
Yeah. I feel like people are naturally very pattern centric. Like, we fall into our patterns. We fall into our rhythms.
Habit formed.
Yeah, people, even the way we think about ourselves, like in terms of like how do we form our identity, we do so through kind of a narrative we tell ourselves of like who we are, where we go, what's our purpose, kind of the four like big questions that every, faith, religion, philosophy, whatever tries to answer is origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. Who are we? Why are we here? What should we be doing? And where are we going?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And both of what y'all said, like, in kind of like the mental health, psychological sphere, like some of these patterns are so deeply ingrained, like within our nervous system and our subconscious, that we don't even realize that we're living out the stories and the patterns that we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I think about in terms of like what is like, what's the role of liturgy? What is worship? Like, what is it that the church does when we gather as a community of faith? Like, one of the primary things is that we live out those patterns.
That's right.
Like, Sunday morning should be a microcosm of what is the life pattern that everybody lives out.
Yeah.
And
That's
so
beautiful.
Yeah, going through those stories, like going through the liturgical calendar, it kind of like, whether we think about it or not, or dwell on it or not, we're still living into that.
Yeah.
We're still coming to church and hearing the story and standing and singing and speaking the words of what the story of salvation is. And I'm absolutely would bank on like that getting into how we form or how we are formed through that process. And that's I think that's a very central element to identity formation for sure.
And it's I think you're absolutely right. The story that we tell ourselves, and part of what we do here at church, like you said, intentionally or not, whether we're thinking about it or not, is retelling that story, like reshaping our story, and therefore reshaping our identity. And I think something you said that really struck me, because I think you ask a lot of people what faith is about, and most people today will talk about it's believing the right thing. It's being able to say the Apostles' Creed, or it's saying that I believe in Jesus Christ. But a lot of faith has everything to do with what you do with your body and the story that you're living out, and it's not necessarily conscious. Like it's not something you dwell on. It's something that you're living out, right? Yeah. And I think we forget that a lot of times. And that's really the importance of these practices that we do, is that it is literally embodying the story that we believe, or that we say we believe, and by doing so, actually creating the faith that we say we have.
Yeah, it's one of the things I think about, like in terms of like the canon of Scripture. One of the things that kind of strikes me is the fact that there's no like book like in the New Testament that is a dedicated catechesis as a part of our canon. like every epistle, every work is so like, here's an image of what one who's walking the way of Christ looks like.
Yeah.
Here's the commands that Jesus gives. This is what you should do. This is how you should then live.
Mm-hmm.
All of Paul's letters, even the ones that kind of get more into the more, theologically complex and, historical focus or whatever, the more abstract, he will always end it with, therefore, this is what you do. This is what it looks like.
Yeah.
And so I'm always struck by how we do, especially just kind of in the Western world, we treat the faith as kind of a quiz, like believe this, don't believe this.
Yeah.
Like, here's kind of the first order. If you believe this, you're a Christian. Here's second order. This is what's kind of different between denominations and stuff. But like, it's more of the pattern I see in the early church is live in our community, see what it is that we do, come to worship, come to liturgy, and not as a way of like learning the right stuff, but living into the story.
Yeah.
And then go therefore, make disciples of all nations. It's a very active way of doing things, so to speak.
Yeah. I like it.
I'm in my other class this semester is Letters of Paul. Or it's the second half of New Testament, technically. And so I'm getting into all that stuff right now and trying to really understand Paul myself for the first time. And just that conversation around what does it mean to, like you said, to be part of the community, and kind of this idea that Paul, above all else, is saying this is the most, like, above anything else, above any law, above any practice, the goal here is to be part of the community and to be unified.
Yeah.
And that's just mind blowing to me.
Okay.
The more I read, it's just like, oh man,
that's awesome.
And I think I've said this in a bunch of my classes, but I'll say it again. I think Paul, in his letters, I think the number one thing, and he talks about it in every single one of his letters, but I think the number one thing he says is the witness of the church, is the unity of the church. That is our witness. That's what makes us stand apart from every other human social organization, is that we're unified in the Spirit. Mm-hmm. In as much as we are unified in the Spirit, we are witnessing to the presence of the Spirit in our midst. And it does get back to the way of living life together, worshiping together, doing the liturgy together, loving one another, serving one another, and not so much about whatever your opinions or thoughts or beliefs, your list of beliefs might be, what your creedal kind of formation is. We have forgotten that, obviously, throughout the history of the church and even recent times, and it's always been an issue, but that's something to keep in mind, I think. And another reason why things like Lent and Advent and Christmas and all those things are so important in the life of the church.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And that's the funny thing, talking about your Letters of Paul class. Like, it's so funny because you have people kind of in biblical studies who kind of specialize or focus in on one area or one genre or portion of Scripture. Some people are more Pauline scholars. Some people are more, prophetic works, whatever.
My focus is Jude.
Yeah. Oh man,
I don't know what that book's about.
That's a unique one for sure.
Yeah,
I actually know somebody who did their dissertation on like 2 verses in 1 John.
Really?
Oh wow. Yeah, it was all about atonement stuff, but I was like drawing a lot out from just kind of a small amount of material. But the funny thing is when I look at Paul, him trying to speak what was, what was the revelation of the faith, which they didn't see it as anything new. They saw it as a continuation of what God was already doing. We have this kind of tendency to say, like, first century, you had Jews or the Judeans, and then you had the Christians, and it's like they wouldn't have seen each other. Like, Judaism at that point was so multifaceted. There were so many different like schools of thought and like forms of it that was just kind of another way of doing things. Paul was, he was the apostle to the Gentiles, and like in the Greco-Roman mindset, that was the norm of how to understand life and its mysteries, was discourse, was debate. But even if you compare Paul's letters to like other treatises written by Greek or Roman writers, philosophers, like it doesn't follow the same structure as like, point 1, point 2 on this subject as the title, whatever. It has a little bit of that, but I think that's to kind of get the new believers in the door. Yeah. And then he follows through with, once again, like here's application. This is what, this is how you live into this instead of just debate about it on, at Areopagus or wherever. And I'm one of those guys, like, I guess this is a hot take. Like, this might be something y'all debate about in your class, but the author of Hebrews. Yeah. Everybody has a different take on who wrote that. I think it actually was Paul. Yeah. But I think it was one of his sermons that Luke was probably writing down because the vocabulary is very similar to the Gospel of Luke and Acts.
That is a hot take. Yeah. Could not be more wrong.
Yeah, well.
No, I'm just kidding.
But it doesn't follow the form of like a like the epistolary structure. Yeah. And so.
We were talking about that when we went to lunch the other day about the idea that what's baffled me about Paul is we have a handful of his letters, right? Okay. But what we don't have, and what I'm shocked that we don't have is like somebody's sermon notes, right? Somebody's like writing down what Paul said, right? And not just Paul writing letters. And so what you're offering is, well, maybe that's what Hebrews is.
Might be.
Yeah. I like that because ever since you brought that up, James, that has been in my head, and I'm like, well, why don't we? What is this? Like, where's all the extra stuff? Yeah. If he's that important, if he's that much of a giant,
nobody's writing this stuff down. Come on.
So vocabulary is one thing. Another thing too is all of the older collections we have of Paul's letters. The earliest put together, they always have Hebrews with it.
They used to think that it used to be recognized as a Pauline epistle for the first couple hundred years. Yeah. So maybe so. I've always kind of leaned toward it being something like Barnabas. Yeah. But I like that idea though. I like that idea a lot. Yeah. When we talked about this too, like what would happen if we uncovered another letter of Paul?
Oh my God.
Because there's got to be so many more. What happens if we uncover one?
That'd be pretty wild.
That'd be crazy.
It would be the question. I guarantee the debate would be: was it Paul? Was it early Christian writer? Mm-hmm. Was it? I mean, there's so many different works in the early church where, like Dionysius. Was it really him, or was it like? Mm-hmm. The guy who wrote it 3 centuries later, all these different things. Yeah.
So. Like that famous joke, did Homer actually write the Iliad, or was it another guy named Homer?
Well, all right.
That's funny.
This is, if I was teaching a Bible study in Romans, I've done this before. My trick question to a class is, who wrote the book of Romans?
You told me it's a trick question.
Why is it a trick question?
Because Paul didn't write with his hand.
Right. He
book of Romans.
It,
I'm trying to remember at the end of the letter. I think it starts with a T. His secretary, his amanuensis, is the one who says, "I am writing." So once again, I'm a nerd. I love getting into those little, those little interesting conversations. But
it's so fun. So we're doing this week. I'm in Romans, but it's just 1 through 8. I know we are. It's great. I love it though.
Apologize to everybody out there.
So it wasn't this week, it was a couple weeks ago. We were talking about, I don't remember which letter it was, but the whole idea that Paul is addressing when people arrive for the communion feast. And you get the people who were not working during the day, they have more money, they're a higher socioeconomic status, and they're in like the main part of the house. They didn't have to go to work. So they started the feast early. They started the Lord's Supper early. And then you get the people that had to work all day long, and they're showing up later. And so they end up in the outer room because there's not enough space for them. And, they get like the leftovers because everyone else has been there all day. So they've been drinking and eating, right? And so Paul's trying to help this community understand what it means to have the Lord's Supper together and what it means to respect each other and the differences. And again, the whole point is community. You're supposed to do this together. Mm-hmm. And just knowing that background and understanding the visual of what's actually going on in this community, to me, is just insanely helpful for understanding what Paul is trying to say. And I guess almost ironically, like understanding that specific context, even though it is wildly different from mine, helps me apply what Paul is saying better to today. If I can get a picture of what was going on then that he's actually speaking to. I just love that stuff. Yeah. It's so helpful.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing is we'll approach Scripture And I mean, most people, if you grow up in the church, like you're encouraged by and large to like try to read through the Bible, try to get a sense of what it says. But all we have as far as our understanding of the way the world is and the way that, conversation, like assumptions, I always say that like words are vehicles for ideas. Like we carry a lot of stuff when we come to the text. So one of the reasons I love talking about like the history of the historical context around the biblical works is you can understand what's motivating and what's like behind the scenes, so to speak, of these, of what's there in the text. Like what are the things, what's in Paul's mind when he's giving this command or trying to present this image, what is, what's the world that they live in? And that really does make I tell people it's like, if you understand, the background of the scriptures, like if you see a stained glass window, but it's in repair, it's on the ground or it's like still being worked on, you're going to make out the picture and get a sense of what's being represented in the window, right?
Right.
But when it's up and the light is shining through, that's like a whole different experience. Like you can get the gist in both scenarios, but and you want to see that in its full glory. So the text came about within a community, within a setting that and miraculous. I mean, how many people are reading 2,000, 3,000, 4,000-year-old texts on the regular every day?
We're in this room.
Really. Well, I mean, it's one of those things that's one of the most amazing, not from the outside looking in circumstances, but we understand what's going on. Like, it's amazing that we can read that text and still get the gist of it. But if you do the extra work of saying like, okay, let me understand the world of Paul, let me understand the world of Moses, understand the world of David, then it just makes the whole text just that much more exciting.
Yeah.
So
I love it. Speaking of stained glass windows, Douglas, as a final thought, I'm going to ruin something for you. When you walk into the Faith and Arts Center downstairs through the big wooden doors, on the right, you'll see a stained glass window of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Jesus is not sitting at the right hand of God the Father.
I know.
He's sitting, and you already got it.
Another critique is you don't typically depict the Father. That's what kills me about that. So usually you don't. The only depiction of like the Trinity, like of any kind of form of it, is Rublev's Trinity, which actually technically isn't the Trinity.
Right.
It's actually the three visitors to Abraham.
Oh yeah.
And like the church never depict. I mean, except for the Sistine Chapel. But then the Sistine Chapel, you've got angels who look like cupids and stuff. So it's like, come on. So yeah. I've noticed some things too. I just keep it to myself,
Well, Douglas, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation today. We are excited you're going to be preaching here in soon. Is that coming up this Sunday? Or
not this Sunday, next
weeks?
Sunday.
Okay.
Daniel chapter 6.
All right.
I love the book of Daniel, so I'm excited that this will be my first one.
All right, what is the date on that for whenever our folks are listening?
March 3rd, I think.
Oh, it's my birthday.
Yeah.
You'll be preaching on my birthday.
Right on.
March 3rd, guys. Come here.
Yeah.
Come next Sunday as well and hear Bill and Jeff. But also come on March 3rd and hear Douglas.
And you'll also be stepping into my chapel class for Sunday school after the season of Lent. So after Easter, you'll be doing during the month of April, you'll be stepping in there to teach a 4-part series on something.
Yeah.
So that's exciting as well.
Absolutely.
I'll say that our former co-host, Nick Houston, used to have the best hair on staff, but I think you might have brought the best hair back to Northside, so well done. And thank you again for being a part of this. Elizabeth, thank you. And
Happy
guys,
to be here.
We'll see you next week.